Welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Visit legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight. So there's been a lot of discussion in recent weeks about First Amendment protections, free speech, and we've seen the Supreme Court hearing the oral arguments in Murthy versus Missouri. We've talked a lot about Scotland imposing this new law that is restricting comedy on the basis of hate speech. We've seen the Twitter files and the censorship over the last several years before Elon Musk took over and made that X, and even with Babylon Bee getting censored for their headline that of course was satirical, that their man of the year was Dr. Rachel Levine, and somehow that's considered hate speech. So the question, of course, then becomes, what does our First Amendment say and what does it require? Well, I want to dispel a very important myth of the U.S. Constitution and our Bill of Rights. The First Amendment does not actually give us our right to freedom of speech. And you may be saying, well, Jenna, the text of the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging or infringing upon the freedom of speech. And there are a couple of other rights, including petition for redress and, of course, the all-important free exercise clause. Well, yes, that is textually found in the First Amendment, but you have to understand the U.S. Constitution in context. What our founders did through the Declaration of Independence, which was basically the mandate for government. It was the first document that our founders gave us the philosophy that our constitutional republic would be built upon. In the Declaration, they acknowledge that truth is self-evident and that our rights are pre-political. They come from God, our creator, not our government. So the sole purpose of government is to preserve and protect the rights that we already have that were well before even the U.S. Constitution was designed or ratified, and certainly before the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution, known as the Bill of Rights, were ever ratified by Congress and the states. And so we need to understand what the First Amendment actually does in context. And interestingly and importantly to history, Alexander Hamilton, who was one of the founding fathers and one of the three authors of the Federalist Papers, including then Chief Justice John Jay, who, of course, went on to be the first Supreme Court Chief Justice, and Alexander Hamilton and also James Madison wrote these papers that were arguments for the ratification of the U.S. Constitution that in its then current form that was ratified in 1787. And in Federalist 84, Alexander Hamilton actually argued that a Bill of Rights, in the sense and content in which they were originally contemplated, originally in England, didn't make sense for the U.S. Constitution and a constitutional republic. This is what he said in Federalist 84. Why, for instance, should it be said that the liberty of the press shall not be restrained when no power is given by which restrictions may be imposed? I will not contend that such a provision would confer a regulating power, but it is evident that it would furnish to men disposed to usurp a plausible pretense for claiming that power. They might urge with a semblance of reason that the Constitution ought not to be charged with the absurdity of providing against an abuse of authority which was not given, and that the provision against restraining the liberty of the press afforded a clear implication that a power to prescribe proper regulations concerning it was intended to be vested in the national government. This may serve as a specimen of the numerous handles which would be given to the doctrine of constructive powers by the indulgence of an injudicious zeal for a Bill of Rights. Hamilton then rightly recognized in Federalist 84, it has been several times truly remarked that bills of rights are, in their origin, stipulations between kings and their subjects, abridgments of prerogative in favor of privilege, reservation of rights that are not surrendered to the prince. Here, and he's talking about here in the United States, here in strictness, the people surrender nothing. As they retain everything, they have no need of particular reservations. Quote, we, the people of the United States, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. He's, of course, quoting the preamble. Here, he says, is a better recognition of popular rights. So, to break that down, what he's saying is that a Bill of Rights isn't even necessary when we are, as a constitutional republic, limiting the powers of government. We, the people, don't give over all of our rights to the government for the protection and the blessings of liberty, and then only through a Bill of Rights reserve certain rights to ourselves that can't be infringed upon in government. That's how Bills of Rights worked in Old England. What he's saying is this is a completely different form of government. We, the people, only through our consent give to the government specific limited powers to operate. So we're not giving them the power to abridge the freedom of the press. Why do we even need a First Amendment? He was absolutely right. Now, in the Constitutional Convention through the Continental Congress, of course, the delegates argued, and Madison said, no, we actually need some textual provision so that the Congress can't look at its powers and try to manipulate it so that they could infer that they have an ability to restrain the freedom of the press or free exercise of religion or freedom of speech or petition to redress, all of those very important provisions, or, for example, the right to keep and bear arms in our Second Amendment. And ultimately, our founders went with James Madison, and we do have a Bill of Rights, but it is a very different Bill of Rights than in Old England. And so we have to recognize that even if we didn't have our Bill of Rights, even if by some crazy, constitutional analysis that the First Amendment was actually repealed and some other provision overrode it, that still wouldn't change the fact that our rights are pre-political. The rights that we don't give the government any power by which to abridge. So we in the United States have come to think colloquially, and I think we've bought into this myth that I want to dispel, that our rights outflow from the Bill of Rights, that our rights, because they are textually listed in the Constitution, our right to freely speak, our right to freedom of the press, our right to freely exercise religion comes from the First Amendment. That's utterly false. Alexander Hamilton was absolutely prescient when he said in Federalist 84 that we don't actually need a Bill of Rights. That's still true. Our Bill of Rights, and I'm grateful that we have it so that our current government can't infringe upon it, but he was absolutely right that this just serves as a redundancy protection. Congress, in case you weren't clear, you can't infringe. Why? Because no power is given in Article 1, and the First Amendment expressly, as a redundancy protection, says, Congress, in case you weren't clear, you have no power. Congress shall make no law. So instead of talking about our First Amendment rights, talk about our pre-political rights, which the First Amendment, as a redundancy protection, obligates our government to preserve and protect. We'll be right back with more. As the weaponization of government continues and political persecutions turn into prosecutions all across the country, you may be familiar with Douglas Mackey's story. He was politically prosecuted for simply posting a meme during the 2020 election. This is absolutely and utterly ridiculous. And he joins me now to tell his story and where he's at on appeal. So, Douglas, this was just a meme that just made a mockery. Was it the 2016 election or the 2020 election?
Good afternoon. It was the 2020 election.
Okay, all right. So we got that right. So, so this was just a meme, and what happened next?
So 5 years later, Joe Biden got elected, and 7 days after that, the FBI came, knocked on my door 7 in the morning, and said, "We have a warrant for your arrest." So I said, "For what? What's this for?" And they wouldn't even tell me until after the arraignment in the courthouse when I finally got a copy of the criminal complaint. So it's been a long journey since then. We had a trial in 2023. I was convicted, and the judge sentenced me last fall to 7 months in federal prison for posting this meme. And she denied outright our motion for a bond. However, that was overturned at the Second Circuit Court. So here I am. I'm waiting for our appeal. We've got all our briefs in with the Second Circuit Court and just waiting for the arguments, which are coming up in about 2 weeks.
Okay, and if you want to support the Meme Defense Fund, go to memedefensefund.com, and you can also learn more about Douglas Mackey's story. So let's go back to the trial court stage. I mean, so this particular meme, what was it, and on what possible basis was this even alleged to be criminal?
Right. So this meme said, skip the line, save time, text your vote for Hillary Clinton to like a 5-digit short code, And this was just a meme that I saw on the internet. I thought it was humorous. I saw it on 4chan actually, and I posted it. And then, yeah, that this was turned into a sort of criminal conspiracy against civil rights.
Wait, so this wasn't even your original meme. This was just something that you kind of borrowed, or, when people talk about, meme stealing. I mean, I repost memes all the time on social media. This wasn't even your original content?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that's one of the factors.
Wow.
There's many that's so chilling about this prosecution.
That's incredible. And so, has anyone in like Biden's DOJ ever cared to actually go and find out who posted this, or did they just come after you because your account got so much attention?
Great question. They mostly just came after me because, like you said, my account got so much attention. They had a list of co-conspirators who are just people that were online posting memes and talking about memes in DM groups. But I was the only one they came after. Excuse me. They also did squeeze some guy. They twisted some guy's arm who I never met. I saw him in the courtroom for the first time and said this was my co-conspirator. So they had a cooperator. The guy, poor guy, weighed about 400 pounds, and said they had put him on the witness stand to say that we had a silent agreement over the internet.
Wow, this is beyond like anything that Hollywood could have created for like a dystopian, post justice society, and yet we're seeing this play out before our eyes. And so, so at least you are out on an appeal bond. And where is that headed in terms of the arguments that you're making? Which, I mean, in my view, based on what you're telling me, absolutely they shouldn't have even been brought. You shouldn't have been convicted at trial. But we know that a lot of these convictions are very politically based because they forum select. But what is the basis of the appeal moving forward?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that forum selection is a basis of the appeal, but our appeal is multi-pronged. First of all, there's the notion that you have to have fair notice that that what you're doing is a crime. This kind of crime, that posting a meme is a conspiracy to injure someone in the process of using their civil rights. Well, this is the kind of statute that was written because the KKK was going up and beating up African Americans on their way to the polls. I mean, that's the kind of conduct that this statute was written for. So there's the idea that, if you're going to prosecute someone for free speech and political speech, well, you better know in advance that it's actually a crime. Second of all, I was living in Manhattan at the time, which is in the Southern District of New York. They brought the case in the Eastern District of New York, even though there was no connection to the district. So venue, which is a constitutional argument, that's a very strong plank in our appeal. And finally, there's the idea that I didn't even conspire with anybody. That there might have been group chats where people were talking about posting this meme, people were designing it, but I wasn't participating in any of that. So it's a guilt by association sort of smear. So all the briefs are in at the Second Circuit. The government's briefs are in. Our defense briefs are in. And now we're just waiting on the oral argument April 5th.
Okay, well, we will pay close attention to that oral argument. You can go to memedefensefund.com. And you're absolutely right, Douglas Mackey, that you have to have fair notice under the law that the conduct that you're participating in is criminal activity. And obviously, what we choose as a society to criminalize says a lot about what society designates as the inherent difference between right and wrong, good and evil. And if we're suggesting that somehow you collaborated with all of these people to post a meme, I mean, where's the harm here? I mean, could
Right.
they even isolate one quote unquote victim of your meme, that somebody actually texted this number and then like didn't exercise their right to vote and was actually substantively harmed?
Great question. They couldn't find one person. They said that 4,900 people texted the number. Well, the vast majority of those texted the number after this story was covered widely by BuzzFeed and all sorts of other media outlets. They actually went around the Eastern District of New York knocking on people's doors saying, hey, did you text this number back in 2016? And most of the people either couldn't remember or they said, and then they would ask them, did you believe that you were voting? And they said, of course not. I'm not an idiot. So they couldn't put a single victim on the witness stand, which says a lot about the case. And in a case like this, where you're talking about satire and parody, where there's a lot of stuff that's borderline. If they're going to start going after that with no fair notice, then this puts a massive chilling effect on anyone posting online or posting in general. And the other thing is they brought in all kinds of political memes and satirical memes that were not criminal into the case as evidence of that there was a background to this criminal conspiracy. This group of people were texting and posting these memes. So if they're going to introduce that as satire, I mean, the Harvard Law Review recently covered this case and said this is extremely chilling to free speech, and this was a mistake for the DOJ to even bring this case.
100%. Well, we wish you the best, Douglas Mackey, and we'll have you back on after those arguments. And again, go to memedefensefund.com. We'll be right back with more. So there's a growing concern among particularly Gen Zers that the ability to be homeowners is rapidly diminishing with corporations buying up a lot of single family homes. So this social media influencer, I guess I can call her that, posted this video somewhere, whether it was TikTok, Instagram, not really sure, but this has now made the rounds on X as a platform. Watch this.
I just watched what has to be one of the most horrifying videos I have ever seen on this app regarding our country's financial future. It was posted by a woman named Tiffany. I will link it. She's talking about how private equity firms have been buying up all the single family homes. So up until very recently, we didn't actually have the numbers to say just how many homes they've been buying up. And most politicians across the board, Democrat, Republican, whatever, have been saying, well, they're really only buying like 18% of single family homes. And then economists chimed in and said that if private equity firms are buying up anywhere from 18 to 20 to 23% of single family homes in this country, that by 2030, they would own 60% of all of the homes in America. Well, we just got the final numbers. In 2023, private equity firms purchased 44% of all of the single family homes in America, which means death for our middle class. Our generation will not be homeowners.
So the X account Wall Street Apes posted that, and it caught the attention of Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who actually linked to that video and responded on X saying this: I strongly support free markets, but this corporate large-scale buying of residential homes seems to be distorting the market and making it harder for the average Texan to purchase a home. This must be added to the legislative agenda to protect Texas families. So Tho Bishop is our resident economist, and he comes to us from the Mises Institute. And Tho, is this right? I mean, are we going to see a massive drop-off in the middle class because of corporations that are buying single-family homes and basically making it impossible for young people to actually be homeowners?
Well, I think this is a very important topic, and it's one where I think some of the numbers, the 44% number, I think be a little skeptical of that. I've seen some analysis out there that it's a bit lower than this, but we've obviously clearly seen a trend of large institutional investors getting into the housing market, and obviously the anxiety that millennials, Generation Z are feeling are warranted. Now, I think one of the problems is simplifying it to simply that the problem with the housing market is BlackRock and these big firms buying up the inventory. Again, we have seen that trend, but that trend is reacting to, I think, a lot of the other dynamics that have manipulated the housing market. Again, the biggest purchaser of mortgage-backed securities is the Federal Reserve. One of the most powerful political constituencies is realtors. And you have an entire class of Americans where so much of their net worth is built in their housing prices, built in the evaluation, the increased value of their homes. And so we have so the housing market itself is so saturated with politics and policy that what you see are large investment firms realizing that environment, rushing to it. And there is a major problem right now to the extent where, if your mortgage for your average, starter home for your average, young family is 6-7%, large firms can come in, buy it from with cash they have in the reserves. That is creating a massive advantage to these large players in the field. But the underlying problems are not these large equity firms. I've got no real sympathy towards, but these are symptoms of a much larger problem, which is the politicalization of the housing market. Now, does that mean like a state like Texas? I'm not going to hear the complaint about Greg Abbott, trying to do something for Texas. Texas is one of these hot spots in it. I think I've seen up close to 30% the homes being purchased right now by large firms, not necessarily BlackRock, but some of these players that we're talking about. So if there's a state-driven dynamic there to try to help protect first-time home buyers, when we recognize that we don't have a free market, then states taking initiatives to help protect their constituencies, I think that's a valid process to deal with it. But the problem here is
let
not
me
simply
interject
corporations;
here,
it's much larger.
though. Yeah, and it is. And I think there's also a social dynamic that, millennials and Gen Zers are choosing to get married, a lot later in life. And that obviously, without having a dual income home, some of those dynamics. And then, of course, interest rate increases. I mean, there's a lot more than just corporations. But from a free market standpoint, what can the state of Texas do against corporations that are here in America? I mean, here in Florida, for example, the Florida legislature has said that, okay, China and foreign nations can't own property. That makes a lot of sense. And that's a protection. But in terms of trying to combat this legislatively, what are things that are actually constitutionally viable?
Well, I think, in terms of what states can get away with, again, if you want to create restrictions on, again, if you want to prevent a firm like BlackRock from purchasing homes within Texas, then, how that is allowed to play out within the legal process is a separate question, beyond my expertise. But I think we have a very fascinating dynamic right now, and you're seeing this, I think, is reflecting a larger shift within the right, is that simply saying, oh, well, I want to defend the free market, so I'm not going to do anything. This played out with COVID, right? With Florida, for example, banning vaccine passports and COVID mandates and like. That was an intervention, right, within a traditional free market system, a violation of right of association. But it was a reflection of much larger national trends that were subverting basic property rights in its own right, right? You had the entire government apparatus that was contributing to these outcomes. And so here you have a similar dynamic where what we have, younger generations should be upset. Younger generations are getting screwed by this financialized system that we have. Again, it's manipulation of the Fed, manipulation of these asset classes, all these policy apparatuses that are out there. We do not have a free market in this country. We do not have capitalism in this country. And so if you're trying to block, again, large investment firms in your state, I'm sympathetic to it. But what needs to be recognized, though, is that these are dealing with symptoms of this much larger federal level driven program. And my concern is that if we create the boogeyman of these sort of easy to hate corporations, which the left always has hated, at least rhetorically, right? A lot of their money comes from that. And then you have senators like J.D. Vance, right, who target that class. If our focus is simply like corporations are bad, then we're going to ignore what is actually driving this dynamic. And that comes into
100%. We'll have to leave it there. And fascinating analysis, Tho Bishop. We'll be right back with more. My very dear friend and Salem colleague, Eric Metaxas, has a brand new book out called Religionless Christianity, God's Answer to Evil. And Eric joins me now to talk about this new book and also something called Socrates Plus. So Eric, where do you want to start?
Anywhere. How about there? I first of all, thanks for having me on. It was a joy, I want to say up front, to be with you in Orlando at your church where we did a screening of the new film, Letter to the American Church. That's the film version of my book, Letter to the American Church. And the book we're talking about right now is the sequel to Letter to the American Church, called Religionless Christianity. I guess we can start there. I mean, I never have written a book, Jenna, that's aimed specifically at Christians. Every single one of the books I've written, 15 plus books, every book I write is for everybody. A lot of times Christians and conservatives are the ones that buy it, but I write for everybody. I want people to give the books to their friends. This book, Letter to the American Church, and the sequel, Religionless Christianity, I've written specifically for people who say, I'm a Christian. And I've simply never done anything like this, but I think we're living in insane times in America where we are really forced to think about what does it mean to be a Christian. And the book Letter to the American Church was going to be titled Faith Without Works is Dead, because I think a lot of Christians have adopted this kind of pietistic thing, like, I don't need to do anything. I'm not going to be involved in the world. I don't want to talk about politics. I don't want to be involved. I just want to do my church thing. That's heresy. And in Letter to the American Church and in this follow-up, Religionless Christianity, I deal with that because I think it's very important for us to see, what does the scripture say? What does the historic faith tell us to do? And of course, Bonhoeffer is my model in talking about this.
Yeah, and these are so important, such important topics, Eric. And let's unpack this a little bit more, because when you say religionless Christianity, I think a lot of people will take a step back and think, well, wait a minute, isn't Christianity a religion? How can you have religionless Christianity? So what's your premise?
Well, as I said, the first book is Letter to the American Church. This new book, I had more to say. And I thought it's kind of summed up in Bonhoeffer's phrase. It's kind of a clunky phrase, religionless Christianity. What did Bonhoeffer mean by it? And I'll put it this way. We all know that religiosity is not good, right? That Jesus thundered against the religious leaders who were being religious in the negative sense. He said, your hearts are far from God. It's an amazing thing for somebody who says, I'm a pagan or I'm an atheist. When somebody says, I am serious about my faith, I care about my faith, it's the most important thing in the world. I know the Bible inside and out. And then you say, okay, Jesus was condemning those who knew the Bible backwards and forwards. He was condemning the religious leaders, not the pagans, not the purveyors of Hellenistic philosophy. And I think you see this over and over and over again, that the devil's the most wicked place is when somebody is talking about God, but working against God. And that's really what dead religion is. So Bonhoeffer, at the end of his life, it was the last year of his life, he's writing a letter to his best friend, Eberhard Bethge. And in it, he uses this phrase. He says, if we in Germany had a religionless Christianity, in other words, a true faith that wasn't just playing church, just being Lutheran Christians, doing the church thing. If we had really lived out our faith heroically, self-sacrificially, even dangerously, right? To say that I'm just going to trust God, and if I get it wrong, God is a God of mercy. Bonhoeffer always advocated that. And he was basically saying we didn't have that. We had a lot of religion, a lot of religiosity, a lot of people saying, well, we want to do our church thing. We don't want to talk about the Jews. We don't want to talk about the evil of the Nazis. We just think that's not our calling. That's not our lane. We're going to stay in our lane. Bonhoeffer prophetically said, you're getting it wrong. You got it wrong. You better get it right. They didn't get it right. And by the time they figured it out, the nightmare had happened. The state had crushed the churches, had made it impossible for them to speak up. It's like, oh, you want to speak up now? Too late. So that's the message of Letter to the American Church, and it carries over into religionless Christianity, because I'm thinking Bonhoeffer, when he used that phrase, it was over for Germany. It was long past anybody being able to do anything. But in America, we have 5 minutes to get this right. We have a very, very, very short moment, a window of opportunity to course correct. And I think that there's some in the church that are doing that. When I was with you in Orlando, that's another example of a church where I thought, clearly these folks, they're not being afraid to speak into the culture and into political stuff, because they say it's our obligation, our moral obligation. So when Bonhoeffer talked about religionless Christianity, he was pointing toward that idea of, would it be possible for the church actually to be the church? Now, they had missed it, and he's saying it kind of as a lament. But I take it that we have an opportunity to take that idea, his idea, God's idea of religionless Christianity, to live it out now. And so in the book, I talk about what are some religious idols, particularly religious idols, that Christians are guilty of worshiping in place of God.
And I think, Eric, maybe we need to have our own Christian doomsday clock. And, I think we're closer maybe than the 3 seconds to midnight. But this is why this is such a prophetic book, the letter to the American church. And now this next sequel, the Religionless Christianity, because you're absolutely right that if Christians don't actually act on our faith, this is why the Constitution protects free exercise of religion, not just freedom to believe and be within the four walls of our church, but actually to exercise our religion, not only in the public square, but in every aspect of our lives. And if we fail to do that, then do we truly have faith? Well, the Apostle Paul basically said no, because if you are true, genuine Christians and you understand what it means to be a Christian, you understand the calling and the mission of what Jesus Christ truly came to do, which is to offer salvation for everyone and give us the hope of eternity, then you will not be able to help yourself but to exercise your religion in the public square and in every aspect of our lives. And so we got to take a hard break here coming up quickly. But Eric, I want to hold you over into the next segment because there's so much more to unpack here. And also Socrates Plus, which is your I guess your next move to continue to pour into Americans and concerned conservatives, that we really do need to take this warning. We need to make sure that we are standing up for our faith, and we need to have the tools and the resources to not just hear about news of the day politics, these siloed Republican versus Democrat, Trump versus Biden, all of these other minor bickering details. We need to understand our moment is now to stand up in the culture. So we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight with my very dear friend, Eric Metaxas. Welcome back. And I'm continuing the conversation with Eric Metaxas, who is the host of The Eric Metaxas Show and has a brand new book, which is the sequel to Letter to the American Church, called Religionless Christianity, God's Answer to Evil. So, Eric, as I mentioned before the break, this truly is prophetic because, like Bonhoeffer trying to warn the German church, and then ultimately, of course, it was too late, America does still have a moment, and it's a very short moment, to get this right. So what do you hope to inspire the American church to actually stand up and do?
Well, it's a number of things. Somebody the other day said that this book is like the third in a trilogy. Bonhoeffer would be the first, Letter to the American Church would be the second, and the third is this book, Religionless Christianity, God's Answer to Evil. And I think that there is, I never would have intended a trilogy, but the Bonhoeffer book so dramatically spells out where we are now. That's the thing, is that I wrote it in 2008 and it came out in 2010, and people reading it said, seems like this is happening in our country, where the church is letting evil come in and having this really heretical view that, well, we're not supposed to be involved in that. We're supposed to just do church. That's nonsense. That's simply not true. We are supposed to be all in for God's purposes, speaking out against evil everywhere. And so I wrote the book, the Letter to the American Church, to make the connection between what happened in Germany and what is now happening in America. And the sequel, Religionless Christianity, it just carries on. And I would say this, Jenna, to segue to Socrates Plus, we've got to be looking to the future. But if we do not get serious now, if we don't elect whoever the GOP candidate is, honestly, if people don't understand, we need to do that. It doesn't matter if you like him or not. If we don't have the rule of law, if we don't get back to the basics, it is over. I don't think people understand how late the hour is. And so on the one hand, we've got to be involved in politics. We've got to be involved in elections. Like that's just crucial because evil is everywhere. We have madness on the left. We don't have principled opposition. Anybody, when Mike Pence the other day said he would not endorse Donald Trump, I thought, do you understand where we are? Clearly, you don't understand where we are because the idea that you have differences with Donald Trump, we all have differences with Donald Trump. But can you imagine the differences we have with a Biden administration, with anybody on the left? It's so dramatic. And when Christians act like, well, we can agree to disagree, I don't think that they understand what's going on. So the hour is very, very late. But for me,
Yeah,
it's
and let me
about
let me point out one thing here, Eric, because you and I talked about this at length in person when you mentioned, your trip to Orlando and my church, and I of course have had differences with Donald Trump as well, but my bottom line in terms of exercising my vote is I can't imagine how anyone, if they hate Trump, which I don't hate Trump, I simply disagree with him on some policy things, and that's fine. But there are people who hate him. But here's the thing: do you hate Trump more than you love America? That I think that's the question.
That's beautiful. I was gonna phrase it differently, but the same. I was gonna say these people hate Trump, but let me tell you, they actually hate America. Because if you don't understand where we are, if you don't love this country, I mean, it is just the level of madness. And again, it's peevishness. Sometimes people get emotional, we get wounded, something. Folks, we have to be big boys and girls and understand what's at stake. And I think that when Christians kind of take this pious view, like, well, I'm going to sit on the fence. The devil owns the fence. He wants you not to vote. He wants you not to. This is really, really serious. And by the way, we're supposed to, I also say Donald Trump is not enough. So yes, it is vital that we reelect him. But do you think that that's all we need to do? The church needs to be the church. If the church had been the church over the decades, we'd never get in this mess where we are right now, where we have open borders, lawlessness, transgender lunacy affecting children, insanity everywhere. Religious freedom has been thrown in the garbage. In Indiana, they've taken a child away from the child's parents because the parents would not affirm his pronouns. This is Marxist madness. This is evil in our time, and it's the job of Christians to speak up. And I'm just astonished. So that's why I wrote Letter to the American Church. By the way, I should say the website, lettertotheamericanchurch.com. Please go there. Your church can do a free screening of the film. Every church can do a free screening, just as we did at your church in Orlando. No exceptions. Go to lettertotheamericanchurch.com. But, when you ask about Socrates Plus, for me, this is about the future. We've got to save the nation, but then you say save it for what? Well, we have to restore what God will restore, what the locusts have eaten. We've got to redeem the narrative, the America-hating narrative that has come into us through the mainstream media that is now propagandistic, lying constantly. We've never seen this before. And so it's cultural redemption. And Socrates in the City, which people can go to socratesinthecity.com, but all these conversations that I've had at Socrates in the City are intended to bring some light to the conversation about what is the meaning of life? Why are we here? Is God real? Let's explore the big questions the way Socrates did. He said the unexamined life is not worth living. And we have a new streaming service at Socrates in the City called Socrates Plus, where we're just doing lots more stuff and you can live stream the events. I've got an event with the novelist who's an amazing conservative hero, Mark Halperin. That's going to be April 5th in Charleston. You can live stream it. If you're a member of Socrates Plus, you can watch it as it happens. So a lot of exciting things, but I'm looking to the future. So that's why we've set up this streaming platform, Socrates Plus, because we need good stuff out there so people can chew on it and get a different narrative, and we can redeem these horrible secular leftist narratives that are anti-American, anti-God. We need to get in the culture game, and that's what Socrates Plus is meant to do.
Well, and I love it, Eric, because as one of my mentors once told me, and I think that this was a really good advice, it's not enough to call out a problem, you need to provide the solution. And we as Christians know that the only solution is built on the truth of the gospel of Christ and the biblical worldview, because there's either truth with a capital T or things that are not true. And so we have to grow in the knowledge of Christ by understanding what is the truth. And your Socrates events are so incredible. I've been privileged to be there in person for several of them. And Os Guinness, your good friend, was one of my favorites, where he pointed out that, the true definition of freedom and liberty is not just the freedom to do what we want, but the freedom to do what we ought. And what ought we to do? Where is the line of morality? I mean, all of these things are the big important questions, but guess what? Christians have the answer to them. And so I love that you are doing this. I'm so grateful. So get Eric's new book, which is Religionless Christianity. Go be a member of Socrates Plus. Educate yourself on the truth of the biblical worldview. You can always reach me and my team, Jenna at salemnewschannel.com. Love and appreciate you, Eric, and I'll see you guys next week. Hello, friends. I'm Jenna Ellis, host of Jenna Ellis Tonight on the Salem News Channel and the Jenna Ellis Show on the Salem Podcast Network. Thanks so much for joining me again today as we're talking to Charles Thorngren, who's the president of Legacy Precious Metals. And Charles, there was this article that I pulled up in CNBC, and the headline is "Gold Prices to Hit $2,200 an ounce. A dramatic outperformance awaits silver in 2024, says the U.S. Federal Reserve and the UBS forecast." So I think this is really significant.
It's interesting, too. And if you go back and you read, there's a very important thing in there that you want to pay attention to. It's going to average $2,200 an ounce. So with us right now being very close to $2,000 an ounce, that means we're going to have to see us get close to $2,400 an ounce sometime through the course of this year for us to average at $2,200 an ounce. So that's a really important thing. And most people, when it comes to gold, the companies that don't deal in it, when they give forecasts, they don't want to bring a lot of clarity to it. But, thank goodness that you're here listening to this, because we will.
So there's also been rumors that the Federal Reserve is going to cut interest rates in 2024. We're already a few months in. How will that help or hurt gold's performance in this year and into the future?
Sorry about that. I had something ringing. I'll go into it in a second here. So it's an interesting thing. Cutting the interest rates. That's exactly what Wall Street wants to hear. That's exactly what people without any knowledge of economics want to hear. Sounds great. Money's going to become less expensive to borrow. The reality is that the reason we're talking about cutting interest rates isn't because we beat inflation. Last month's numbers show us that. It went back up again. We had a miss, as they called it. They called it a miss. But it's not. This is exactly what Jay Powell was talking about all last year. Higher inflation for a longer period of time. So we're not done yet. We haven't beat inflation. No matter how much they want to beat that drum for their election this year, they're not going to be able to say that they've done it. When we talk about lowering the interest rates, you're going to create a scenario where inflation gets higher. We get more inflation. This is strictly done when you lower when you lower your interest rates, is because the economy is suffering. We're slipping into recession. That's one of the tools the Federal Reserve has to help fight a recession, to make money cheaper. And this is why we're talking about it. It's not because we beat inflation. It's because we are slipping into that recession. You see that in the amount of people that are beginning to get laid off from tech firms, from large firms, from Wall Street. You're beginning to see layoffs. This is the recession that they were hinting about last year. It's coming true this year.
And you were one of the first ones to predict that. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's unfortunately, this is what's going to drive gold up, right? I'm one of the few people who sits in a world where, the product that I sell, when it does well, I don't feel great about it, because it's happening due to the fact that our economy is getting worse. Our money is getting worse. It's becoming less. So it's a unique position for me. I obviously want to share the information, and we want to protect as many people as possible. But when I'm doing great, the economy of America is doing bad. And this is what we need to look at. And this is where, this $2,200 an ounce sounds fantastic if you have some gold. But the cost of it is the issue for me. So when we look at it, and this is why, we say be diversified. So when these things do happen, because in any economy, there are ups and downs. But in a government that won't stop spending, you need the gold. you need the silver. That's the
Yeah.
important thing.
And you had mentioned to me earlier, Charles, that a lot of your clients are now buying gold and silver, even though they do diversify, and you recommend that as well. But they're buying gold and silver because they're nervous that the stock market is going to seriously dip. And so, if they're looking for security and stability, what types of investments do you recommend?
Right now, diversity is going to be very important, and it's going to be diversity of asset classes, not just assets. Okay. You got to have the precious metals. If you don't have it, give us a call. You need to have a serious conversation about it. During the best of times, I say you need precious metals, you need some real estate, some bonds, and some stocks. The problem you have now is your choices are limited. We look at commercial real estate, and it's in big trouble. It's very big trouble. Layoffs are happening. There's so many vacancies right now that commercial real estate is in trouble, and the highest interest rates make that such a difficult transaction. So that's one of the key things we're taking away from diversity. Bonds, bonds become troublesome if you're not in the best quality bonds. Stocks as well, same thing, right? During times of economic trouble, you need to make sure that you are in the most secure, safest stocks. Now, the problem with that, and the bonds as well, the problem with that is those don't tend to be the stocks and bonds that have the exciting story. So many people invest on a story based on the fundamentals. Those story stocks are the ones that are going to get hit the hardest. They don't have the basis and the security. This is why we talk about blue chips, right? It's they're not names that excite you. You know what they are, but the fundamentals are there, and they can stand some downturns. So during these times, you want to look at solid things, blue chips, highest quality assets you can get, and that diversification of precious metals. That's the secret to what's coming. You diversify like that, you have the best chance of coming out with less loss and possibly even growth during a troubling time.
And that's really what you want. And so people can go to legacypminvestments.com. You can download that free investor guide, and you can also call the phone number, or you can browse the website. You can look at all of this. There's actually an investor tool that Legacy has put up there if you want to be in control of all of your own investing. But for a lot of people who may be listening and they're thinking, this all sounds really great, Charles, but I don't even know where to begin to ask questions about diversification. That's really intimidating. How can your investor guides, when they call the phone number at Legacy, help them and even get them to understanding what questions they should be asking?
Right. And that's, a fantastic point. The guide's going to give you a good overall broad scope of things, so that when you do feel comfortable calling, you'll at least know the terminology. You'll understand what we're talking about. And then we can go into how it works in your favor based on whatever your situation is. I think the most important thing is to say to yourself, I'm not going to be too timid to just call and find out. There's nothing bad that we can say on the phone. We're nice people. We're not going to intimidate you. We're not going to make you feel like you don't know what's going on. Gosh, so many people don't know what's going on in the economy right now. Mm-hmm. So taking the first step in and of itself of saying, I'm going to call, that's the strongest thing that you can do, because you're saying to yourself, I'm going to give myself the best opportunity by getting the knowledge that's necessary. And that's the important thing.
Yeah, it is important. And, in my field, in the legal world, people are scared to even call attorneys when they know they may need one, but they're really not sure even what questions to ask or what information to provide. That's actually the job of the lawyer. They're the ones that are supposed to issue spot and ask the questions of the client so that they can give the best advice. And I imagine that it's similar, that as you're engaging new clients with the best advice and getting to know more and more about them and their specific situation, the guides will ask them questions that, maybe are personal, but that's because they want to know, what is your unique situation? What are you looking for? What are your goals out of this? And then they can help collaborate with you instead of just giving you kind of a bunch of options and then leaving you on your own. That's why you have someone who is an expert guide to walk you through all this. So the website is legacypminvestments.com. You can call the phone number on the screen as well. You can talk to someone just as friendly as Charles Thorngren. And Charles, really appreciate your time today. And the website is legacypminvestments.com. And looking forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you, Jenna. It's my pleasure. And I'm looking forward to speaking with you as well.
Thanks.